Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're jumping right into literally one of the most contested frontiers in modern science. We're talking about parapsychology, and we're going to see if the paranormal can actually hold up to rigorous, data-driven scrutiny. We are stepping way past the folklore, the ghost stories, and the whole shebang to examine the actual academic research. We'll be evaluating these claims against the strict, no-nonsense standards of replicability, falsifiability, and effect size that completely define credible science.
Now, you might be wondering, are our current scientific frameworks truly complete? Well, that is the core question driving this entire field. I want you to frame this in your mind not as a spooky campfire tale, but as a really fascinating scientific detective story. I mean, when researchers encounter results that are statistically significant but theoretically just inexplicable, how should science respond? So we are going to explore the very boundaries of current physics and neuroscience to see exactly what happens when our understanding of the known universe is put to the ultimate test.
Okay, let's dive into this by defining our central concept, which is psi. This term was actually coined all the way back in 1889 by German philosopher Max de Suar, and then it was popularized in the 1930s by American psychologist J.B. Rhine at Duke University. Basically, psi is a strictly neutral academic term, and it encompasses two main buckets. First, you've got cognitive phenomena, that's acquiring information without using your normal senses, and second, physical phenomena, meaning exerting an influence on the physical world without using your normal motor systems. Using a neutral term like this is absolutely crucial because it allows researchers to study these claims objectively, completely leaving all the mystical baggage at the door.
So here is our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll be covering 1. What is parapsychology? 2. A brief history of psi. 3. Core phenomena. 4. The experimental evidence. And finally, 5. Scientific criticisms.
All right, let's jump straight into Section 1. What is parapsychology and a brief history of psi?
Now, obviously, human belief in this stuff is as old as culture itself, right? But the modern scientific engagement actually kicked off around the 1840s during the spiritualist movement. And what's wild is that eminent scientists like Alfred Russel Wallace, you know, the guy who co-discovered natural selection alongside Darwin, were actually out there investigating mediums. By 1882, the Society for Psychical Research was founded in London to systematically test these claims. But the real game changer, that happened in the 1930s. J.B. Rhine brought the field into the actual laboratory at Duke University. He used standardized Zener card tests to turn psychical research into a quantitative, strictly statistical discipline. From there, the timeline gets even crazier. During the Cold War in 1978, the CIA literally funded the Stargate project to investigate remote viewing for intelligence gathering. Fast forward to today, from 1984 onward, the field now relies super heavily on complex meta-analyses and Bayesian statistics.
Moving right along to Section 2, core phenomena under investigation.
So, what are the specific superpower-like abilities they're actually testing? Well, the field basically divides them into two main branches. On the left, we have extrasensory perception, or ESP. This is all about acquiring information. It includes telepathy, which is mind-to-mind communication, clairvoyance, perceiving objects without sensory contact, and precognition, somehow knowing future events. Now, contrast that with the right side, psychokinesis, or PK, which is direct mental influence on physical systems. PK is actually broken down further. You have macro PK, which is large-scale stuff like Uri Geller's famous metal bending claims, though to be clear, those are highly contested and totally unsupported by controlled studies. But then there's micro PK. This involves tiny statistically detectable influences on random number generators, and believe it or not, this actually has a pretty substantial experimental literature behind it. To really wrap our heads around how they test this, look at Dr. Sam Parnia's AWARE study on near-death experiences, or NDEs. NDEs are actually reported by about 10 to 20% of cardiac arrest survivors. So to test if patients could genuinely perceive their environment while clinically, biologically unconscious, researchers across 15 different hospitals placed hidden visual targets on shelves facing the ceiling right above resuscitation bays. Out of 2,060 cardiac arrest patients, only 2 survived with sufficiently clear memories to even be tested. One of those patients provided a highly accurate account of the events in his room, but, and here's the frustrating part, he unfortunately wasn't in a room with a hidden target. So by design, the extremely limited hit rate meant the study was completely inconclusive. But honestly, it remains a totally remarkable example of how scientists are trying to test the supposedly untestable.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is we're transitioning right into the actual laboratory data, the crime scene, if you will, of our scientific detective story. Section 3, the experimental evidence.
Let's make this abstract data highly tangible. we're going to visualize parapsychology's absolute flagship experimental protocol, the Gansfeld paradigm. Fun fact, Gansfeld is German for entire field. So here's how the strict protocol works. Step 1. A receiver is placed in mild sensory reduction. We're literally talking about halved ping-pong balls taped over their eyes in a room bathed in red light with white noise playing through headphones to create this deeply relaxed state. Step 2. In a completely different, geographically distant room, a sender views a randomly selected video clip and actively attempts to mentally transmit it to the receiver. Step 3. The receiver verbally describes whatever mental imagery is bubbling up in their mind. And finally, Step 4. At the end of the session, the receiver is shown 4 clips, the actual target plus 3 random decoys, and they have to select the one that most closely matches their experience. Since there are 4 choices, by pure mathematical chance, they should guess correctly exactly 25% of the time.
But they don't guess it 25% of the time. Across more than 40 years of this Gansfeld research, the hit rate consistently lands between 30 and 32%. You guys, this is a critical statistical anomaly. In a rigorously controlled setting, over thousands of trials, hitting 30 to 32% instead of the 25% chance baseline is frankly hugely significant in the world of statistics.
To really prove this is a data-driven debate, we have to look at the meta-analyses. Because individual parapsychology studies are notoriously underpowered statistically, researchers rely heavily on meta-analytic synthesis, basically pooling data from dozens of smaller studies together. Look at this timeline of data. Charles Honerton's 1985 review of 28 studies found a 38% hit rate, concluding there was a highly significant anomalous effect. Later, in 1999, Milton and Wiseman ran the numbers and found a 27% hit rate, which they deemed non-significant, concluding there was no reliable psi effect. But, and this is wild, jumping to the most recent 2024 registered meta-analysis by Tresseldy and Storm, covering over 40 years of data, the hit rate settled right back around 30%, a consistent, statistically significant anomaly. The data clearly shows that something is consistently deviating from pure chance.
And it's not just the Gansfeld experiments either. We see these anomalies pop up in completely other domains too. Take the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research, or the PEAR Laboratory, directed by Robert John. For over 2 decades, volunteers tried to mentally influence electronic random event generators. Across a staggering 2.5 million trials, they found tiny yet highly significant deviations from expected chance outputs. Furthermore, in 2011, psychologist Daryl Bem published a massively controversial precognition study in a highly prestigious mainstream psychology journal, showing significant retroactive priming effects. The main point to take away here is that statistical anomalies absolutely do exist in multiple, rigorous laboratory settings.
Which brings us to Section 4, Scientific Criticisms and Flaws.
So yes, the data shows statistical anomalies, but can they survive a skeptical cross-examination? Mainstream science pushes back incredibly hard here, pointing out some pretty severe flaws. At the very top of the list, the replication crisis. Parapsychology has completely historically failed to produce reliably repeatable demonstrations in independent skeptical laboratories. Then you have major methodological flaws. Inadequate randomization in early studies, where subjects could actually learn subtle patterns. Sensory leakage, where insufficient shielding allowed conventional visual or audio cues to slip through. And optional stopping, where researchers basically just keep collecting data until they hit a significant result and then stop. Now, parapsychologists counter this replication failure by citing the sheep-goat effect. They argue that believers, or sheep, produce positive effects, while skeptics, or goats, actually suppress the effect with their negativity. Critics, as you might guess, point out that this makes the entire field completely unfalsifiable.
To really capture the intensity of this methodological debate, I want you to listen to this quote from prominent psychologist and skeptic Ray Hyman. He stated, "Reliance on meta-analysis as the sole basis for justifying the claim that an anomaly exists is fallacious. It distorts what scientists mean by confirmatory evidence." Hyman's sharp critique hits the nail on the head regarding a major tension in this field. Physicists and chemists don't need meta-analyses to prove a fundamental discovery, right? Their experiments replicate directly across all competent labs, completely regardless of what the investigator personally believes.
So, the crucial point is this: the central evidential debate in parapsychology is not whether the statistical results are significant. As we've clearly seen, many of them undeniably are. The debate is whether those significant results reflect a genuine, undiscovered force like psi, or if they are simply undiscovered methodological artifacts, publication biases, and questionable research practices. We have to impartially report that this is entirely a methodological question. It is not merely a question about someone's personal beliefs.
Which leaves us with this final, really profound takeaway. Parapsychology essentially serves as a massive case study in the philosophy of science. It doesn't ask us to just blindly believe in the paranormal. It asks us to look at the cold, hard statistical data and examine whether our current scientific frameworks are truly complete. And it asks us to do so with rigor rather than ridicule or blind credulity. So as we wrap up this explainer today, I want to leave you with a question. What happens to the boundaries of the known universe when anomalies absolutely refuse to disappear? Could the very act of observing our reality be far more complex than our current physics allows? Keep questioning, keep learning, and thank you so much for exploring the edge of science with me today.